So do you want to take your line drawings from this to this? Then listen up, I have a really easy way of coloring that I want to show you guys. So you're done with your lines and you really like how your drawing looks, but you tend to struggle with the color process. So what I'm going to show you today is my super easy way to color. I use this for almost every artwork, no matter how complex or simple. And for this I'm just going to use Procreate, but you can also use Photoshop and Clip Studio, Krita, whatever program you're using, you should be able to do these things. So what most people would probably do if they're new to digital art is to pick a color. Let's say I want to work on the head. So I choose a red, I go in and let me just have a nice solid brush and I would like just color in. And let's say I filled in the whole head and then I will do the goose and then you can see we have a problem because now I'm going over the line a little bit and then I would have to go in with the red again and go over once again. Oh, oops, I made a mistake again, so I would have to constantly do that and that's not what we want to do. So first of all, I want to make sure that I am under my line art. In some cases you might just use your sketch as your lines, but then just make sure you're under that. And then I would actually go into the selection tool. And I will zoom in quite a bit for this process, but I'll just start, somewhere. It doesn't actually matter where you start. And you can just undo if you make a mistake. And I try not to do one big selection. I'm just gonna do smaller sections. So now I'm lifting the pin and I put it back down. I lift the pin, put it back down, lift it. Then you just do that for the whole silhouette. And it doesn't matter if it's perfect. It doesn't really have to be perfect, but just try to be as close to the lines as possible. I actually try to stay a little bit inside the line, so actually in the middle of my line here, because I try not to go too far outside, but also not on the inside. I would rather be a little bit on the outside than the inside. And we can always tweak the silhouette a little bit later. Now the selection tool will be a little bit different in Photoshop because you can't make a line and lift the pen like this because then it will close it off like a selection, and it takes a little bit of getting used to, but in that program you have to make small selections. I'm just gonna demonstrate here. So in Photoshop you would have to do kind of like this and make it so it makes a selection, and then you would do this and keep on doing that. So now I have selected everything. I don't know if you can see it on the recording. It's quite hard to see on the recording, but it is selected. I think for this illustration, because there are some GIFs in the background, I wouldn't remove this triangle, but if you wanted to, you just hold down on the selection tool and it will bring it up and it won't destroy your selection. But you can now go into remove and you just select the area you want to remove. But for this I will keep it with the triangle because there's GIFs in the background, so it will be colored anyway. I like to just use the base color for my subject, so in this case it's white, but I never choose just a complete white. I always have it in like a yellowish tone or a bluish tone, but for this I want to use a yellowish tone and just have it close to white. And there we have the base color, and we have a base where we can work out from. Now I've deselected everything and I can go on to make a new layer above. And I just click on the layer here and set it to clipping mask. Now what that does is it makes so I can't draw outside of the layer underneath. So as you can see here, I'm trying to work outside it, but it won't let me. You could also use Alpha Lock, and that gives the same effect. But the reason why I like to use clipping mask is because it's non-destructive. So let's say I color in the hat and I want to make it green this time. Just experimenting, so yeah, it's not completely colored, but we have a green hat, and if it was on the original layer and I wanted to erase it, I would end up erasing that layer as well. But here I can just go in and erase, and the base color is still there. I can also, after I've colored it in, I can go to Alpha Lock on that layer, and then I can, you know, really easily just drop a color. So I can play around with all sorts of colors really easily. And if I need to adjust a few things, if I need to make, as you can see, I didn't get to color the head in completely. As long as Alpha Lock is turned on, I can't draw there. So then I can just click it off. Now I'm able to draw outside again. I'm just gonna color in all the base colors, and I try to keep everything on their own layer. That way it's just easier for me to go back in and make changes and be a little bit more experimental later. Sometimes I do go in with a selection tool and select an object and then color drop, but it really depends on what the object is like, and if it's simple enough, I like to just go in and color like this. So the hat needs white stripes, and I'm actually gonna go in and do it on their own layer as well. And now when doing base colors like this, I will always think about, is something going on top of something else or underneath? So in this case, the eye is going underneath the hat, so I'll make sure that layer is underneath the hat layer. And because I colored it very neatly, so I didn't go over something else, I can actually do the scarf underneath the hat as well, because I know that the hat is not overlapping the scarf. I know I said that I keep everything on their own layers, but in some cases, like the beak is the same color as the feet, so I can easily do that on the same layer. You could even do something to be even smarter, and that would be to only select the goose as one base color and then have the gifts and the decorations on their own base color, and then you could do a clipping mask with those and make sure you don't need to worry about coloring the goose on mistake. But I'm pretty used to this method, so for me it's not an issue, but it does make it easier sometimes. It's really helpful if you have a really complex character with a lot of small things. But for this, it wasn't really an issue for me, so I just did everything on one. Also, instead of going like this and trying to not go into the other objects, you can just color it in and then make a layer above. So I just want to worry about coloring the gift all the way in like that. Do a layer above. Here it will actually be easier for me to just trace around with the selection tool. Just select every branch part. Notice how I'm going outside of the leaves thing, but that's because I know I'm using clipping masks, so it doesn't matter that I'm going outside. It only helps because then I know everything will be selected and I won't end up with a little sliver of white. Now I'm just going to do a layer between the gift and between the leaves. And finally one between the gift and the berries. Continue this process until I have everything colored in with the base colors. Now everything has a base color, and now we're gonna use these layers to turn into magic. First I'm gonna make a new layer above everything except the lines, and I'm still gonna use clipping mask so everything stays inside our base. And then I'm gonna choose a cool tone. It's not always cool, but it's my go-to for shadows. And we're gonna set the blending mode to multiply. And I'm also gonna turn it down a bit. You can use whatever brush you prefer to this. I like to use one called Round Render. I think I got it from Lotus Bubbles sketch pack or something. Now when we color, we basically just color in some shadows. Try to keep in mind where I've chosen my light source to come from. In this case I've chosen it to come from here, so the shadows will be in these places. They will fall on this side. So I think this is good for now with the shadows. You can always go in with the smudge tool and soften out some of the edges a little bit. Now these ribbons doesn't look very appealing because my plan is that they should be silver. So now I'm gonna put on Alpha Lock, something very close to white. And I'm gonna try and draw some highlights, shine to it, and also make some parts darker. Do the same for the gold. Now that looks a lot better, and make some highlights on the berries. Another neat trick I can do is to go in, choose one of my line layers. In this case I have them separated, so this is just the goose. I can put it to multiply and turn the opacity down a bit. I can choose maybe a dark brownish color, and also make sure to have it on Alpha Lock. And now it might be hard to see on that distance, but I hope you're able to see it here, but it just gives it that bit more warm tone, so it's not pure black. I can do the same for the gifts. Now this looks quite good as it is, but I like to go in and do a few last things. So one is that I like to adjust the outer borders. So just making sure this stands out a bit more. Now this was a little thick, so maybe not that much, but you know, just kind of doing a second line art, but not for everything, just where you feel like it might be needed to be appealing for the individual parts. So here's just a little before and after I've done that. It just helps a little bit with separating elements. I can also go in and fix a few things, like making this a little bit wider. I am drawing on top of everything on its own layer, so just keep in mind that your layers won't really help you here. And of course I always like to add a highlight in the eyes. Sometimes I choose a light blue. It usually works pretty good. I can also give the eyes just a little bit more life, so making them a little bit lighter at the bottom or at the top, it's really up to you. Now if I want to add a little bit of light, I can select the very base layer and go in and hit select. Now I can go back up on top of everything, and I can set the layer to soft light or hard light or what I feel would work. You can always play around with it. I'm gonna try and use soft light. and I put it to 75% just to see how that looks. And because our shadows are cool, it would be best to use a warm light. And now I can just color that in. It's not very noticeable, so I'm gonna try hard light. There's also add. Add makes it really bright. But if I turn it down, I think it would be a great look. And then I can soften out some of the edges here. Very last thing I usually do is I make a shadow underneath everything, just so it's a little grounded. So I'm just making a new layer and I will drag it underneath everything. Sometimes it's easier with your finger, appropriate. And I'm setting that to multiply and turning it down a bit. Again, I'm gonna use a cool color, so a blue would do fine. And I just color in underneath. And I do smudge tool, so it's a more soft shadow. And voila, you are done. I hope this was helpful to you, and it is a process that I have grown very fond of, so I'm using it in many of my works. It's a very easy one and it's very lossless, so you really have the opportunity to go in and change things later because you keep everything very separated on different layers. And thank you for watching, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!